Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Big Blue View YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like what you see on our channel here. All right, with the draft in the rearview mirror, signing of undrafted free agents, Giants rookie mini camp having just concluded, thought I would have good friend Emory Hunt on the show. How you doing?
Doing fantastic, Ed. Glad to be a part of the show once again and fresh off that rookie mini camp practices that we were able to take in.
Yep, you were you at both? I was only at the first one.
I was at both. I was at both. At least we were outside on the second one, but still
There
really
you
didn't see
go.
much.
The no, we didn't see much, but what I have to say is, you're the best dressed man in the business. Even when you're in sweats and a t-shirt, you managed to stand out. Had that bright pink glow in the dark shirt on Friday when I was there. I was like, geez, the man wants to be noticed everywhere.
Everybody came in dressed in gray and black. It's a fun time of the year. It's optimism in abundance. Why wouldn't you wear bright colors?
There you go. You're wearing bright colors today. That's it's I'm glad I didn't wear red. It would have looked like we planned it. But hey, you know, I I got to start with I got a bone to pick with you, man. I got a bone to pick with you. You and your draft guide, and you do more prospects than anybody in the business, and more of the small school guys and the unknown guys, and you're my go-to for undrafted free agents, tryout guys, all of that. The Giants sign Elijah Chapman, defensive tackle out of SMU after the rookie mini camp, and I go to your draft guide, and he's not in there. Come on, what have you been doing? You've been slacking? Come on.
Right. What threw me off is the fact that he's a short, undersized D tackle. The crazy part is they had one in the draft class from SMU and Jordan Miller who was balling. So I was like, oh wait, there was two. But this is the
Mhm.
problem you have when you have these COVID years and you don't know who's coming out and who's going back. And I'm glad this year we're finally back to normal. So 2025, we should have a more robust draft guy that should have your Elijah Chapman's in there post draft because we know who's a senior and who's still got a few years left. We know this now because there's a very little 2020 guys left in this class moving forward.
Right. We're pretty much through the COVID guys with added eligibility. We'll have a few of those this coming season, but not too many.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what
I
we should watch out for is, I hope coaches don't do this, and you because we'll know if they do it around week 4. You see a lot of mythical out for the year injuries, so
mhm.
guys can get that extra medical redshirt year. I hope they
Yeah.
don't go that route, but that'll be something if we'll see by week 4.
Yeah, I'm glad we talked about that because I had a mailbag question the other day asking if we'd be done with the COVID years by 2030. So, yeah. So,
I
so,
mean, and listen, if it was crazy is because now you could transfer without missing a year, so you have that. And if a coach leaves, you now get an extra free transfer if you're injured. So there's some gray areas around this, but we're getting back to if you're a senior, you are a senior.
we're never going to get back to college football as it was, though.
No,
It's a different
never.
it's a different deal, and in some ways that's a good thing, and in some ways that's a difficult thing. But let's talk for a minute about Elijah Chapman. When I was there on Friday, and I know you were there, we talked about that as well. One of the that we're inside, we're in the field house, and one of the cool things about the field house is media is right on top of the field. And we had the benefit on Friday of being right in front of defensive line coach Andre Patterson and the defensive line drills. Um, did you notice Chapman the way that I did?
I didn't notice him in terms of like what he was doing outside of these guys going through bag drills. What stood out to me was his size in comparison to the other edge guys that they had, now he's the interior defensive lineman, he was the shortest one. These edge dudes that they had were all 6'4", 250, 260. So he stood out initially like, man, he looks like a shorter Snacks Harrison.
Mhm.
He had the dreads hanging out the helmet. He's a shorter, stockier guy. And that's what really stood out. I was like, he was the undersized guy, and lo and behold, he ends up being the one to get signed.
Well, I felt smart on Friday because I felt like a scout on Friday because I'm sitting there watching him and I'm like, I'm watching Casey Rogers, the undrafted free agent defensive lineman out of Oregon that they drafted, and I'm watching these guys and I'm watching Chapman, and they did a bag drill. They had another defensive lineman holding the bag, and they would pop up out of their stance and try to drive the guy back. And I'm like, geez, every time he pops up and hits somebody, the guy goes back about 3 yards. And I'm like, whoa, that doesn't look the same as when everybody else hits somebody. So I wondered at that point, if he might be a guy that they would bring to camp. So it was just interesting. I felt smart.
And it's good that he utilized his size as a skill. People just assume because he's not 6'4", 330 that he doesn't have the same amount of explosiveness and power. Where au contraire, mon frere, he does, because he's 6 feet, 300 some pounds. So he has a natural center of gravity. So he's able to explode out of his stance quickly and get into a guy's chest, i.e., the bag, which is why you saw that quick jolt of power and energy to walk those guys back 3 yards.
So I want to ask you, I was kidding you about Chapman a little bit, but you are the guy who knows most of the undrafted guys, the off the radar guys for most of us. Uh, Tell me Giants group of undrafted players, and I can list them if you need me to. But tell me off that list off the undrafted guys, who gets your attention?
Instantly go to the receivers, because I've talked about John Giles since January, out of West Florida. He stood out right out of the gate to me at the College Gridiron Showcase, which is the postseason All Star game in Fort Worth, Texas, first week of January. I'm like, wow, like this dude is operating at a different level of smooth. And it's fascinating because at that time in Fort Worth, it's cold, it's windy, it's cold. And here's this kid from Pensacola, Florida, just out there operating like it's 75 degrees. And so he gets a call up the following week. I go to the Hula Bowl as I was a sideline analyst for that game. So I'm there all week as well. And he gets a late call up. So he's fresh off the College Gridiron Showcase, stands out the week during practice at the Hula Bowl against FBS corners. And so he shows he can match up. Then when I go and watch the film in February, I watched the game against Florida A&M. He's opened a lot against Florida A&M, but his quarterback couldn't get him the football. And there's two corners at Florida A&M that we'll be talking about next year in the draft class. So it was cool to see John Giles stand out consistently. I thought this year he would have been my Colton Dowell, who I saw at the Gridiron Showcase last year, and talked him up all throughout the process. And he gets drafted by the Titans in the 7th round. But I'm glad to see him end up with the Giants because he's a taller guy, could jump out the gym, great athlete, and did a great job in showing that he can play at this level by going through the All-Star game process. And Asir Asante out of Wyoming, I saw him down at the Tropical Bowl. And this was interesting because the Tropical Bowl week, I felt bad for everybody that was there, myself included, because on it was a 2-day practice, and normally you're getting good weather in Florida at that time of the year, mid-January. But this year you had day one, the first team practice, it was raining. Then it stopped raining for the second team's practice. Then the next day, the last day, it didn't rain for the first team practice, and then it rained for the second team's practice. So it was like these dudes didn't really get a good showing for 2 days because the field was slick and the field was wet and it was raining. So you had to truncate the practice a little bit. But Asante stood out in both days. He's quick, he's agile, he was winning one-on-ones. We know that's kind of heavily slanted toward the receivers anyway. But on a slick field, I was impressed with his footwork, his body control. You go back in February, you watch the film, You watch him, okay, this guy can be a slot guy. He can be someone that can help you out on special teams. And now you see a pathway for him to probably make the squad as a return specialist.
It's funny with Asante. What I went back and I looked at is there's just not a lot of college production there, and I'm curious. How hard is it to project a guy when you look at that and you say he's got traits, he's got speed, he can line up in a couple different places, but there's just not a ton of production. Do you look at that and say that that might be quarterback driven, offense driven? Do you try to look beyond the production?
Well, I went back. I've known him since Holy Cross, so I go back and watch him at Holy Cross. Where you like, okay, him and Coker were two really good receivers. And Holy Cross had an offense, so he transferred up. So it was good to see him go transfer up. But then he goes to Wyoming, and to your point, Wyoming, they're a little bit kind of balanced, so they'll run the ball a lot. They'll throw two tight ends out there and run your outside stretch plays, and and then they'll throw when necessary. And a lot of times they're using the tight ends or they're using their perimeter guys as outside guys. So Asante playing in the slot just didn't warrant a lot of opportunities at Wyoming. But so that's why you have to go back and watch him at Holy Cross and get a good gauge of what he can do as a receiver, which is why I thought he was a terrific slot option. And then he returned kicks at both places. So he has a special teams role. And now with the new kickoff rule and things of that nature, maybe he has an opportunity there. I tried to ask Daboll that question when I was at practice on Saturday, and he kind of just brushed it off. Maybe he was just already agitated from the previous questions. But nowadays we get you might with the kickoff rule, you might get a chance to go back to the old school way of putting two guys back there to return kicks. So whether it's kicks or punts, and that opens up the door a little bit more for creativity in terms of returns. So maybe that's a pathway that they saw him. Hey, maybe we have a chance for him to make it this way because he has extensive kickoff return experience.
Thoughts on the Giants didn't draft any offensive linemen, and I get people gnashing their teeth about that. Joe Shane signed 5 veteran offensive linemen, and what I've asked people is, you go through the draft. What I've said is, okay, you're complaining that he didn't draft an offensive lineman. But when you look at the guys he did draft and the players who are available, do we really have an argument until you get to the 6th round where Christian Mahogany was available? And if we're arguing about a 6th round pick, what are we really doing? What are we really doing if we're arguing about a 6th round pick? But not a lot. But my point is, let me ask you this. Were you surprised that the Giants didn't draft any offensive linemen? And your thoughts on the 2 undrafted guys maybe that they brought in, Jake Kubas out of North Dakota State, and the kid Marcellus Johnson out of Missouri, and I believe he was at Eastern Michigan before that, if I'm correct. It's just so your thoughts on that whole situation.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me because even though I'm a big Christian Mahogany fan, and he was my 5th rated guard, right? So I get it, but at the end of the day, you gotta you draft guys, and when you draft guys, they are in the plans of the organization. You got to let these guys play. We saw them draft Izudu and McKeithen. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are
Right.
guys that are still within the program, and
Right.
you sign free agents. So now you have guys that you drafted that are that have played. So they are technically depth guys now with good starting experience, with a pathway to probably start if need be behind the guys that you brought in free agency. So when you look at the room, there's not room for more, right? And we know how, and this is something the league should change. We know how thin the offensive line depth is on game day. So I feel like even if they would have drafted a guy, does he even make the 53 or 46 on game day? Well, I feel like the real depth questions should be in the secondary, where they address that. with the draft pick. And so I think this year's draft class for the Giants, outside of quarterback, they knew where they lacked depth and impact. So they went ahead and grabbed those with draft picks and signed free agents to fill the back end of the depth at those spots. So even at quarterback with a Drew Lock. So I just feel like, yeah, you're right. If you're in the sixth round, talk about taking a lineman. I mean, what about the guys that you took in round 5 or round 3? These guys you still have a plan for, and so they need a place to play, and just add another guy to the room would just been, wouldn't have been great use of resources in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'm curious, circling back to that, what do you know about the two undrafted guys that they brought in, Kubas and Marcellus Johnson?
Nothing about either guy, to be completely honest. I could only speak schematically from what we've seen from Kubas at North Dakota State and how they operate. There's a lot of power. So you see a lot of, good downhill running, a lot of down and around guys, pulling guys, being on the move. And that seems to be a hallmark in the North Dakota State offensive lineman. So I can't speak for him specifically because I didn't study him, but schematically and watching a lot of FCS football throughout this football season, you kind of know what you're going to get from a North Dakota State lineman. So I would, even if I go back and dive into his film, I'm pretty sure I'll mark down how well he can get out on a move, how well he does at attacking and consistently being able to hit his target at the second level. I guarantee you I can put those in my strengths based off what I already know about North Dakota State.
All right, let's talk about let's talk about the draft class itself a little bit. We already talked about the offensive line situation, and Pro Football Focus the other day said the Giants have the worst offensive line in the league entering 2024, and I'm not sure about that. I think that's sort of grading on reputation. Um, I think let actually before we even get into the draft class, do you like what they did? The veterans that they added. We don't know how it's going to play out. We don't know what Evan Neal's going to do. We don't know if Jermaine Illuminor is going to wind up at right tackle. But I do feel like there's options there, and I do feel like the change in offensive line coach might wind up being a good thing for the Giants as well.
And we get a healthy Evan Neal, so we have to see what that looks like first. And so I think that's a reason for optimism. We already know what they have in Andrew Thomas. We already know what they have in John Michael Smith at center. Runyon, I feel like is a good player. I'm a big fan still of Azudu and McKeithen as depth guys. Yeah, I like what they've done in the offseason. So to me, worst offensive line, I know it, like you said, is based off reputation, but there's some good pieces here. And to me, quarterback is really the issue more so than the offensive line. We saw this play out when both Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito got in. We talk less about the offensive line issues, correct? So it shows you how important a quarterback's play is to offensive line play in terms of understanding protection, knowing where your hots are, and get rid of the football quickly, or scramble and buy time to where you don't take the sack. And so if they can carry that over this year at quarterback, I do feel like we'll see the offensive line be a lot better. And I think that's the key. I'm not saying the offensive line is the best in the NFL, but I don't think they're the worst.
No, I think that if it's I would say league average, if it's competent, if it's somewhere in the middle, that's a big improvement, and that gives them a chance to play functional offense. That gives whoever's at quarterback a chance to be functional.
Totally
Um,
agree.
Let me ask you, let's actually talk about the draft class per se. Just give me your favorite pick out of the guys that the Giants took in the draft.
I mean, his neighbors is my favorite.
Mhm.
He was my number one Z receiver, so flanker. Um,
Mhm.
dude is instant offense, man. Like, in we've talked about this before, where when you have certain quarterbacks, you probably need certain receivers. If you have someone that really throws a deep ball well, you can take guys. You can take your time and setting up the deep ball and getting receivers that really work deep down the field. For the Giants case, let's say projecting Daniel Jones is a starter, right? We know his deep ball is not the best, and we know he would rather get the ball out of his hands quickly. So you scale your offense toward that, right? But the cool part about Neighbors, he can win at all levels of the field. So if you're Daniel Jones is your starter and you're getting the ball out quick, cool. He can take the short pass a long way. If you are Drew Lock as your starter and you want to set up a deep shot, cool. He tracks the ball well deep down the field and is an explosive talent. He provides the game breaking element for the Giants on any given play at receiver, which is something they hadn't had since Odell Beckham Jr. So I love that pick.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but when we talk about the Giants and receiver, I'm not going to sleep on Jalen Hyatt either. I'm not going to sleep on that speed, and I'm not going to sleep on his ability to develop as a big time playmaker. I think, people are forgetting the learning curve that he had coming out of Tennessee.
Well, look at it like this: when Deshaun Watson was cooking down in Houston, and they had DeAndre Hopkins, who was the bona fide number one, correct? The guy that was really killing you consistently was Fuller, right? Fuller, in that scope, in that sense, is what Hyatt could be to Neighbors. Neighbors is going to be the number one. So Neighbors is going to be the guy that is going to draw coverage, that he's going to be the guy that the quarterbacks are going to go to in clutch situations. But the guy that's going to really, slash your throat, it's going to be Hyatt, because to me he is the one that gets vertical, and if they can hit him deep down the field, he is the Fuller, the Will Fuller in this offense in comparison to what Houston was able to build with Hopkins and Fuller. I think the Giants can do that with what they have currently in Neighbors and also Hyatt.
Are you as curious about what kind of NFL player Tyrone Tracy turns into as I am and as a lot of Giants fans seem to be?
Yeah, again, I spoke with him. He was one of the sideline interviews I had during the game at the Hula Bowl, and it was something I had noticed all throughout the week. So I got a chance to ask him. I was like, "Listen, normally when guys play receiver and get handoffs, or they throw them in that running back as a novelty, they look like receivers playing running back." I said, "You look like a running back who just so happened to have played wide receiver." And he brought up like, "Yeah, my physicality is something different." And he became much more comfortable with more opportunities to carry the ball at Purdue, and you saw that throughout the week at the Hula Bowl. He was finishing runs, finishing the touchdown he had in the Hula Bowl. He finished strong at the goal line. He ran through about 2 tackles and then got in. And so when you combine that physicality with his ability to catch the football, it makes him a very good option. So, and if you look at their depth chart, right, you're talking about Devin Singletary, you're talking about Eric Gray, whom they drafted last year, and Tracy, all of these guys are able to catch the ball very well. So now you are able to get 5 guys out in a route if you trust your O-line protection, and you have a legit mismatch every time with whoever is in the backfield versus whoever the linebacker is that's scheduled to cover them, because you have legit threats at receiver, at running back. So I'm a big fan of what Tracy brings.
I'm curious to ask you about Eric Gray. We didn't see much of Gray last year. We saw the Giants try to sort of force him into the kick and punt return role. That didn't really work out, and I think Joe Shane admitted that they kind of missed out on their opportunity in the draft for guys that they might have really preferred to put in that role. I think they gave up their 4th round pick last year when they moved up for Hyatt. So they kind of pigeonholed him into that role. It didn't work. We didn't see much of Gray as a running back. I think very, very limited carries. I'm just curious, if you go back and think about Gray, do you think he can still be an effective NFL running back?
I think he's how can I put this? I do feel like he can have a role, but what's going to be the uphill battle is Tyrone Tracy, because I feel like Tracy does provide a little bit more juice than Gray does. Gray is more of a build up speed type runner, while Tracy has a little bit more of twitch. So we
Mm-hmm.
can see Tracy develop into that RB2 right away, which now puts Gray in a position where, hey, he has to compete now with Brightwell, Jayshon Corbin, um, for that third role in returning kicks, which is a role that you brought up perfectly that he didn't really excel in. So now you wonder, man, you hate to see it, but are they going to quickly give up on a fifth round pick for a fifth round pick this year? And it's not shocking that they took a at that same position in the same round that has a little bit more of a wide array of skills than Gray does or did coming out as a prospect. So you can kind of see them maybe admitting he's probably not a fit, but that's why we go out and play the games and practice every day. That's the battle to watch, I feel like, during training camp.
So you think Gray might actually be in a fight for a roster spot?
I think so because Gray can play. Gray has vision, good footwork, fluid runner. I like Gray a lot coming out of Oklahoma. Um, and I said this last year. I thought he probably could have came out after Tennessee, but he went back, got more coaching at Oklahoma. So the talent is there. It's just that it's a what have you done for me lately league, and if Tyrone Tracy comes out at training camp, not making bust in assignments and able to show the plus ability that we've seen as a runner and as a receiver. Um, and with his kickoff return experience, it kind of looks, you kind of look at Gray like, okay, now you look at him in comparison to the other backs that I mentioned, Corbin and Brightwell. We know Brightwell has return kicks. And it's like, okay, well, how is he keeping those guys away? And that puts him in that on that bubble that people love to talk about when it's training camp time.
All right, Em. I know that you're a busy guy. Other people want your time and your expertise. So I think at this point it's probably a good spot to let you go. Just quickly, let folks know if they don't know where they can find your work.
Go and get the draft guide. It's great for the all season outside of the Elijah Chapman mishap. It's
I'm not
still
gonna let
great.
you forget. I'm not gonna let you forget that one, Em.
It's still a great piece of content to
Yes,
help
it
you
is.
throughout the preseason, even to check out the other opponents' roster and rookies. You can go get that at footballgameplan.com/2024 draft guide.
All right. I have to tell you real quickly before I let you go. I'm giving you grief about the Chapman pick, but in 2022, our guy Chris Flum, who does most of our draft profiles, really really good. With the draft in Joe Shane's first draft, Chris did I think 115 or so profiles that we posted at Big Blue View.
Mm-hmm.
After the second round, we had profiles on nobody. I think we had Thibodeau, Neal, and Wandale Robinson, and the rest of the draft. And Chris was going like, "What is Joe doing? He's not looking at the same draft board I'm looking at." so,
They
it
did have
happens.
he had a lot of football game plan draft guys on there too. In that
There you
the
go.
kid Riley that ended up going in the seventh round last year.
There you go. All right, M, thank you as always. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.